Welcome to the Darkstream, Vox Day, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. Hey, Cordell, thank you. Uh, that was the fastest Darkstream super chat in the history of the Darkstream. Appreciate that. It was before I could even say that PD has confirmed that audio and video are good, as did Ironic Keyboard. Thanks, guys. So, I was a little late to my normal posting today at VP for the reason given later, subsequently, on the blog. I spent a alarmingly early and yet enjoyable morning, and I actually mean like morning in the way that most people mean it, not the way that I mean it, which is a little bit before noon. Um, Anyhow, it was a war game group, but uh, a very sophisticated one, and it was really enjoyable to be around people who knew an awful lot more about the subject than I do in a field that's actually of interest to me. So, quite enjoyed that, and so we're pleased. I was pleased to get a bit of an education today, and some very impressive people and really smart guys. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to get involved in the playing since I already had a previous commitment that meant I wasn't going to be able um, to actually take part. But it was fun to get to observe the games. They were playing three different games, all related to World War II. One of them, an old Dunnigan game, very old. One that was released as recently, I think, as 2020 or 2021. Um, and they did it really well. Each game had a referee who was an expert in those particular rules, and then each game had two players, so two sides. Um, Anyhow, it was a lot of fun. I'm kind of glad uh, I was I was invited, um, and then they asked. I just said, do you want me to say a few things, kind of from the game design perspective or whatever? And they said, yeah, that'd be great. And I did, and I never would have I never would have volunteered to do it if I had any idea uh, the sort of individuals who were involved. Fortunately, um, I did manage apparently to say some things that struck them as interesting. So it wasn't at least it wasn't embarrassing, as it very easily could have been. Um, and one of the things uh, that I was told was of interest was when I pointed out that Wargame, as it is customarily and primarily and conventionally used by wargamers, both amateur and professional, um, is really a misnomer. You know, most of the games that we play, not all of them, but most of them, don't really have that much to do with war qua war. It has to do with one particular and significant element of war, but really, if you think about it, the vast majority of war games are actually battle games. And I think this reflects something that Victor Davis Hanson described as the Western way of war. And you see the Western way of war and the thinking that it imposes on people all the time in the media, whether you're dealing with professional military analysts or you're dealing with clueless talking heads who are just sort of babbling whatever they're told to say. But all of it tends to rotate around the idea of the decisive battle. And yet, if there's one thing that we have learned over time, again and again and again and again, even the most decisive battle is no such thing. Even the most, or is often no such thing. Certainly, in any war, there is a final battle, and we use the term often when we use the term decisive battle, we are referring to something that notably turned the tide of the war. Whether that battle itself really was the decisive element or it was simply what happened to be the turning point that involved many, many other factors that were much more significant than the results of that actual battle itself. Um, I don't know anyone who seriously believes that Stalingrad was the was actually the causal factor in Germany's defeat in World War II. Some people talk about that way. Some people suggest that it might have been possible, perhaps, for Germany to have defeated the Soviet Union if they had taken Stalingrad and gone on and taken Moscow. But we already know from Napoleon's failure that taking Moscow wasn't necessarily going to do anything. Um, and so, if we think about decisive battles, what battle in history has ever been more significantly won by one side versus the other than Cannae? Cannae was unbelievably successful. We still talk about double envelopments today. And yet, Hannibal didn't defeat Rome because of it. He eliminated a couple legions, but that was it. The Germans in Operation Barbarossa won success after success after success. To the extent that we refer to that as a battle, and we should, or a series of battles, and we should, due to the number of Russian or Soviet divisions that were destroyed, captured, killed, etc. Um, the Germans had successfully accomplished all of their goals, all of their strategic goals. It's just that their strategic goals proved to be irrelevant because the Soviets had the ability to produce more armies faster than the Germans could destroy them. And what got me thinking about this, and actually let me continue the thought before I go back to the other point. What got me thinking about this was the Taiwanese war game, the Battle for Taiwan war game that was published by the CSIS that I am going to be reviewing here in detail soon. And the whole thing was published as as if it determined a winner. Basically said the U.S. should be able to successfully defend Taiwan on the basis of this analysis. But when you read the analysis, and I'm pretty sure I'm not giving away any big secrets here, considering how much I've been banging on about this for the last 6-9 months, whatever it's been, is that if the results of a battle for Taiwan were as reported or as averaged, then the U.S. would have won the battle and lost the war. Why? Because for the same reason that the Germans couldn't beat the Soviets. The Chinese are going to be able to build more ships than the U.S. can possibly destroy. There's no question about it. And this leads to the next Western fallacy that we see again and again and again. And back me up on this. Confirm if you've heard this. Uh, Ukraine is going to win because the Russian people are going to get frustrated that Russia hasn't won and Putin will lose power. How many times have you heard that? They even say that about Xi. They even say that about China. Well, yes, I mean they might the maybe they'll be able to make more ships and they would be able to win the war, but surely the terrible blow and the losses will drive Xi from power. Well, on the basis of history, no, it won't. How many losses did it take to drive Hitler from power? You know, Hitler was never driven from power. He never lost power, despite the fact that he completely and utterly destroyed Germany. He lost dozens of major battles without losing power. You know, it it doesn't matter who you talk about. When did Tojo lose power? Nibmeister's right. China wouldn't blink an eye at 20 million dead. China killed 50 million of its own people. You think they're going to rise up? They're going to rise up in anger against the Chinese Communist Party and its chairman? Well, no chances. Putin is going to die of cancer in 4 months for the past 10 years. But that thinking, those predictions of, oh, we're somehow going to be bailed out by a miracle, is directly connected to the Western way of war. It's directly connected to the one decisive battle, the one decisive event. Right? And it seldom works that way. You can't say that it never works that way. I don't know enough about, you know, the situation in Iraq or the situation in Libya. But certainly, look at Syria. Syria has been 2/3 conquered by everyone from the Kurds to Islamic State. It's being occupied. It's been occupied by the USA. There's Russian troops there, etc. Who's still in power? Assad is still in power, despite the fact that practically every Western leader who said Assad must go is now gone. And so it's a false hope anyhow, because the war does not depend upon Putin. It's kind of like when we were in the arbitration dispute with Indiegogo, and I had a conversation with their main lawyer, and she said, "Well, you're a pretty reasonable man. You just don't seem as extreme as they paint you to be." I said, "Well, I'm not." She said, "Okay, well, why do people talk about you like that?" I said, "Look, I'm in the middle camp. You know, the I said, of all of our backers, there's kind of a third that are more inclined to just let things go, a third that want to, um, you know, put the pedal to the metal." She goes, "Well, that's still another third." I said, "Well, yeah, the other third wants to burn the building and pile skulls in front of it." She says, I don't like that faction." I said, "No," I said, "but I'm the one who stands in between you and them. You know, I'm the moderate. Look at the difference between me and the Kurgan, for example. The Kurgan is a good representative of the more extreme faction. You know, I'm the we'll do what we have to do, but I would prefer not to do it. I'd prefer to come to a reasonable accommodation if possible. If it's not possible, fine. If it's necessary to scorch the earth, so be it. But I don't I don't, you know, have the appetite for destruction that a lot of, frankly, the Dread Ilk and all of the VFM do. You know, and so if she was not in power, maybe you'd get some corrupt apparatchik who'd be willing to take bribes from Clown World and um, and you know get manipulated and played, or maybe you'd get someone who's more akin to uh, a Mao type figure, only one who's focused externally instead of internally, um, and isn't being advised by a guy named Shapiro. Um, so there's no. It's just a fundamentally false and wrong assumption. Hawk points out a lot of Russians appear to like Putin precisely because they see him as a moderate with balls. I think that's exactly what Putin is. You know, the people who talk about him as some sort of power hungry dictator have no understanding of his SSH profile, and they're not paying attention to his past behavior either. You know, personally, I think the much scarier Sigma would be Xi, because Xi's mission is very different than Putin's mission. Putin's mission is to restore Russia. That's what he literally lives for. That he wanted to step away from power, but he quickly saw that his successors were not as capable as he was. They, his mission wasn't complete, so he went back to it. He tried repeatedly to convince the West to see reason, to get them to stop allowing Kiev and encouraging Kiev to persecute the Russians of the Donbass. John John Bradley's quoting me. They don't understand that I'm the nice one. Precisely. You know, I mean, the reason that uh, yeah, I think the reason that I have the reputation that I do is because number one, I've been known to do what's necessary when it's become necessary. You know, I mean, if a conflict is not unavoidable, then I don't hesitate to embrace it, obviously, and make sure that you know, we win it, or at the very least don't lose. But um, the desire is not for the conflict. We live in it. You all know the mantra. But that's not, conflict is not my mission. You know, where she's mission is, I think, a little bit more uh, alarming than Putin's mission, is because Xi's mission is to eliminate corruption in China. And the reason that that's of concern to the world is because Xi is also extremely smart. He's almost certainly the smartest leader on the entire world scene. Unless you read his stuff, unless you understand the significance of him embracing Wang Hunin as a top advisor, it might be difficult to see it. But he is, I suspect he's a lot smarter than I am. And when you see someone who is that intelligent, who is that hardened by his personal experience, and his personal experiences were pretty rough, and you understand that the Western intelligence services observed back when he was in college that he was very, very opposed to corruption, and if if he came to power, uh, they thought that it was possible that he might even institute some kind of program, anti-corruption program, and he certainly delivered that in spades. Um, I don't know what the number is up to, but I do know at one point, a couple, like 2, 3 years ago, it was something like 88,000 Communist Party officials had been uh, kicked out, arrested, and even executed. And it went all the way to the equivalent of the Supreme Court. I mean, imagine, imagine. First of all, you can't even imagine that happening in the United States, because, and the media wouldn't go crazy because that would practically be enough to include the entire media in the arrests and removals. But Debugger Bear says, so that's why he stopped the small hot migration to China. That's precisely why, because he understands that the corruption that China was experiencing was not entirely internal. Obviously, most of it was. But at the higher levels, you know, holy cow. Hawk says roughly 2.3 million party officials have been prosecuted for corruption since 2012, if Wiki is to be believed. Um, maybe they're trying to, portray him as a bad guy, but um, the point is, it's a massive, massive anti-corruption effort. Now, I think Putin's talk of denazification, and when he talks about the denazification of the West, I think that he is describing something similar. But Putin is describing a goal, an objective. That's not his mission. His mission is to make Russia good, healthy, and holy again. Sunlight says, it seems like it'd be easy to accuse Xi of using corruption as an excuse to purge enemies, especially to West. Well, he has been. And they've even tried to portray these purges as being somehow political or ideological or even just paranoid in nature, except for the fact that the stuff that they bother to report is indubitably corrupt. When some top official is banging his mistress at uh, you know a multi-million dollar um, apartment that is in his mistress's name, uh, it's really difficult to say, well, she's just being paranoid when when he prosecutes the guy for embezzling all this money and cheating on his wife, which in China is still a big deal, and so forth. Um, Sunlight says, sad that we live in an age when any who really do purge corruption will be seen as corrupt. Well, we live in an age of inversion. We literally live in clown world, which is a world of satanic inversion. I mean, look at me. Even a lot of my enemies will readily admit that I speak the truth to the best of my ability in almost all situations. Right? And yet, if you were to look at how I'm described in the media or whatever, it's all intended to try to make me look dishonest and make me look like a liar, you know? I mean, the that little horde of professional gammas, that's all they go on about. You know, they're lying, they're grifting, they're cheating. I mean, it's total inversion, you know, and like, one of the one of the two biggest culprits is literally, you know, an inverted tranny. I mean, it's just ridiculous. They they can't even tell the truth about what their sex is, much less anything else. Um, so it, it's the inversion should be expected. That doesn't mean that everybody that they say is bad is good, but the possibility has to be at least entertained, right? And um, so I think going back to the war game, battle game, tactical skirmish thing, um, there are. I mean, the need to avoid inversion is, I think, why it's important to be specific about these things. Not in colloquial usage, you know. I mean, there's no need to be a smart boy and say, "Hey, do you want to come and play uh, a war game on Saturday?" And, sure. Which game is that? Well, how about we play Waterloo? That's not a war game. That's a, I think you mean battle game. I mean, I'm not talking about that sort of thing. I'm just saying that it's important to understand the concepts and be able to distinguish them in your mind. That sort of accuracy matters. I was actually watching some of the recent Reacher. Um, I think it's the Netflix maybe. Anyway, it's the new Jack Reacher um, series. I never saw the Tom Cruise one, but I've got to think that this one is a lot better just because, you know, um, not only do they have a guy who's supposed to be like this 6'5" uh, physical monster, but he's also supposed to be highly intelligent. And what I thought was pretty cool was that it was one of the first times that I saw intelligence, high intelligence, being written correctly. And it, typically when um, they're trying to portray somebody being intelligent, they just have them spouting obscure information. You know, they just have them rattle it off, and that's you know, I mean, to me, that's like, oh, so they so they looked it up on Wikipedia, right? And it it was funny because what they were actually showing on this this Reacher show was not just pattern recognition, but the way that pattern recognition works. The connection to what I was saying before, I forgot to point that out, is they do have him. What they don't do quite as well is they're trying to point out that he pays attention to detail. I think they were trying to set it up because he kept correcting people on small things and then would say, details matter. I mean, there he just came off as like an actually smart boy, you know. But what they were really setting up for was the fact that he's at a very successful businessman's operation, and they're unloading animal feed, and he's just kind of curious. He's like, "That's that's a lot of animal feed," and he keeps coming back to it again and again because he can't make sense of it. He can't place it. He can't take the piece of the puzzle and he can't place it there, the way that it should go. And that's exactly how it works, at least for me, you know, there's times when I'm reading something. I'll give you an example. The first time that I read Euthyphro, Euthyphro comes up a lot when you're dealing with college educated atheists, and they haven't actually read it, but they've been told that Euthyphro is the correct philosophical answer to is God good because he's God, or is he God because he's good? And so I thought, I know what it is too, but is it really the answer to the horns of the dilemma that it's supposed to be? Because to me, it was very obvious that there was no dilemma. God defines good. End of story. Where's this? What is this dilemma of you speak? You asked me a question, I told you the answer. There's no contradiction. But I went and read it, and some of you who have read The Irrational Atheist have probably read my mock dialogue with Socrates. And the first time I read it, the problem didn't leap out at me, but there was an anomaly, and so I just found myself kind of going back to the Socratic dialogue, because it was just it's like a little stone in your shoe. It's not that bad, it's not that big a deal, but it just keeps bothering you. And then so I went back and reread it, and then I saw the problem. Socrates cheats. He literally switches a definition. And what's amazing is, think about how old this tradition of redefinition is. It's I believe it's called amphiboly, would be the Aristotelian way of pointing out the dishonesty of that, the sophistry of that. And it's kind of funny because people talk about Socrates versus the sophists, but he is a sophist himself. He literally engages in a textbook sophistical technique in order to cheat his way into creating a false dichotomy. And so I was impressed by that because, like I said, Sheldon does, Big Bang does often, he's portrayed as being super intelligent. But they don't really do a particular job of showing how he's super intelligent, that he's super intelligent. You're just told that, and then his behavior is indicative of some quasi-autistic, highly intelligent people. His attitudes, his behaviors, but they don't actually show it in action. They do the Hollywood thing of, they even make fun of it at times where they're, staring at the board. Cactus Cedar Bear says Sheldon is pedantic. Yeah, and that's also very typical. They confuse pedantry with intelligence, for which I will always hate them, because now, especially when you're dealing with internet gammas, everybody thinks pedantry is a sign of intelligence. And it's not. I always think it's funny when someone tries to get pedantic with me, because what they don't realize is that it's very, very easy to dig down to the next level. They're like, well, you're just rounding the Newtonian physics, and you say, well, your Newtonian physics are just rounding. What about quantum mechanics? Is this table isn't actually there? It's just atoms. It's just atoms. That's correct. Pedantry is a sign of memorization. So is reciting facts. And think about it. And the answer is not gammas. Who is most likely to recite facts and resort to pedantry? Pretty sure you guys can get this one. It's pretty easy. What was the conclusion of the amount of feed that Reacher was noticing? I don't know yet. Not far enough into the series. I'm assuming that it either involves drugs or cash, drugs or counterfeit cash. Higgs has it. It's the midwits. You know, not only do they like to demonstrate their above average intelligence. No, it is not deltas. It's midwits. But they're the ones who think that pedantry, rather than pattern recognition, that memorization of facts, rather than speed of processing on a limited basis, is intelligence. It's not. It's just memorization. You know. I do have a pretty good memory for things, but anybody who wants to put the time in can out-memorize me easily. A photographic memory doesn't mean you're intelligent. It means you have a photographic memory. Just like having perfect pitch doesn't mean you can play the guitar. You're more likely, I think, to be a great musician if you have perfect pitch. I assume you're much more likely to be a good singer. But the perfect pitch is not the same as the talent or even the skill derived from practice. And so, again, that's why I thought that was interesting. I thought that was really good writing that way. Like a false wall, hidden room, something about the dimensions subconsciously bothers us to the point that you are aware consciously. Well, yeah, I mean, it's just, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be, you know, an investigation, like the one being portrayed on the show. It can be a logical error that is presented in an argument, either from in a book or in conversation. Hawk assures us that perfect pitch and playing many instruments do not make one a great musician. There we go. So, O tells us that Reacher Season 2 is pretty good. That's good. Well, I'm happy to hear that. It's always good to know that you're going to continue to be reasonably entertained. But I mean, I assume it's so popular as a book. Reacher is a shout out to the Delta fiction of the 70s and 80s. Gamma fiction has dominated from the mid 80s onward. All the you're a special boy, and you're born to be special, and your parents aren't your real parents, and you're the secret king. I mean, obviously, Reacher is obviously a Delta fantasy because he's good at everything. He's super competent. He gets the girl. All that. I mean, that's Delta wish fulfillment. Be super competent, be respected, and get the girl. Anytime you see stuff based on that, you know you're dealing with Delta Entertainment. Gamma Entertainment is uh, you're the special one. Uh, Only you can save the world because you're born to do it. It's your destiny, um, and it doesn't really matter what you do or what your talents are or what you decide. You will just be magically swept along on this roller coaster that will save the world, and uh, you won't get the girl. The girl will inexplicably throw herself at you and will forever be in love with you and loyal to you, um, no matter what you do. That's gamma fantasy. Also, she'll have red hair. it's it's still one of the weirdest things to me. Like, why are gammas particularly obsessed with red hair? What do you think of MacGyver? I've never seen MacGyver, either the original or the new one, so I couldn't tell you. Um, but based on what I know, I mean, obviously I'm culturally aware of MacGyver. He's the super clever guy who can make a machine gun out of chewing gum and uh, a rubber band. Um, I am guessing that that is almost certainly gamma fiction. You know, like classic Delta fiction is Tom Clancy stuff. You know, the hierarchy, the team. You know, doing the job together. Um, Anytime you've got like a, a lot of scenes that are like mutual male respect, it's that's Delta stuff. That's Delta fiction. Anytime you're dealing with Special Boy, Destiny, Hero's Journey, that's Gamma Entertainment. Um, Female entertainment, of course, is that's like all the SJW stuff. It's all the female stuff about how. I mean, the perfect example is Ms. Marvel. She's the greatest and most super and best and prettiest, and she's successful all the time, no matter what she does. Everybody wishes they were her. Actually, that's pretty much that's pretty much what sums up the female entertainment is everybody wishes they were her. Um, and so that's how when even if the trappings are not consistent with uh, the core theme, um, that's how you identify who the real target of the entertainment is. Um, and before anyone asks a really retarded question, entertainment is not made for omegas, it is not made for alphas, and it is absolutely 100% not made for sigmas. Um, there is lambda entertainment, of course. Um, you know, uh, Sex in the City is probably the closest thing that anybody would have seen uh, for lambda entertainment. It's just done with girls. It's instead of gay men. If you just imagine that the women are actually men, then it all makes sense. You but that's actually for both, to be honest. I mean, that's one of the reasons why. And anytime you get a type of um, entertainment that manages to appeal to two of those four markets, you're probably going to have at least a cult hit on your hand. Obviously the size of the audience are, female audience is biggest, uh, delta audience is second, gamma third, lambda fourth. So if you can combine those two, if you can somehow combine the delta and the gamma, or what's much more typical if something is combined, you have stuff that is female entertainment that also really appeals to gammas. That can work too. The reason I think big sweeping shows like the like the upcoming miniseries Shogun, like a Game of Thrones, I think the reason that those become big is that they actually manage to appeal to a broad range because they're using such a huge scope. If you've got a big enough scope, then you can bring in elements that would appeal to all of those. You know, and so uh, I don't really. I mean, the funny thing is, you would think I would do this. I don't really uh, directly utilize the SSH intentionally in my fiction. Um, but that's largely because I don't write for commercial appeal. I'm not writing to make a living. I'm not writing to try to, uh, you know, get people to buy books. If I was writing to get people to buy books, I would not be writing 900-page books. It'd be ridiculous. Hawk says multiple storylines lets everyone pick their favorite. That's absolutely correct, and that's why it's frustrating that I am a limited writer who naturally. I mean, the thing that's funny is, unlike most male writers, I can actually write female characters pretty well. I mean, the female readers here can either confirm or reject my statement there, but um, there's no one has ever accused me or even suggested that you know I do the David Weber um, men with breasts thing. You know, my female characters are very female, but what I don't do very well is I don't write either midwits or average people of characters of average intelligence very well. You know, even when I'm trying to, uh, the character tends to come off as more intelligent. Glass Darkly sends a super chat, thank you, and says, I finished reading Altar of Hate. I liked a reliable source and the title story, Purity of Blood. Well, I'm glad you liked them, thank you. Um, but it is fundamentally difficult if you are an outsider yourself to comfortably write about people that are insiders. I think, and I've been told, that I had some success with Lodi, and I have also been told that despite the fact that people quite like the character, um, I apparently failed with Lugbol. He was supposed to be just a little bit brighter than the other orcs. Um, Apparently, I didn't do that so well. Fine, you know. Maybe I can improve upon that a bit in the last one. I don't know. Um, but I do find it is a bit odd because most writers who are capable of writing about more characters than just self inserts, um, they usually do a better job, or they usually find it more difficult to do women, and they find it easier to do different type of guys, even if they don't like them. And like for example, take Larry Correa. Monster Hunter Nation is very much uh, Delta fiction, and he actually does do a credible uh, alpha. The guy who's the original fiance or boyfriend and is good at everything and is handsome, and but he doesn't love Julie the way that the protagonist does. He doesn't love her enough. He doesn't deserve her the way the protagonist does because the protagonist's love is true. You know, I I find that stuff so tedious. But you know, so there's definitely you can tell there's, but you want to say that's Gamma. That isn't. That's Delta. You know, because he doesn't really undermine the guy. You know, he doesn't. He might he gets snippy mentally, but he doesn't actually. You know, he doesn't destroy the team and put everybody in danger because of his jealousy. You know, it's kept under control. A massive Delta tell description in loving detail of tools, weapons, systems. Yeah, that's very Delta. Um, but yeah, but he does do a good job of describing the envied alpha. That was impressive. You know. Carnaby says, I gave my son The Gods Are Thirsty, given your praise of Tanith Lee. He loved it. How is her character writing? Um, Her character writing is uh, almost irrelevant. Um, Honestly, uh, you know, she's so into mood and uh, images and abstractions, um, and psychological elements that the characterization um, is almost irrelevant. I mean, she makes it unclear whether the character is even male or female. You know, and she's not above swapping them around either. I mean, it's hard to describe in a way that does it justice. Fat sends a very generous super chat. Thank you for all the work you do, Vox. Cheers. Well, cheers, Fat, and thanks very much for the super chat. Appreciate it. You know, when I'll give you an example of why I fell in love with Tanith Lee, with her writing. You know, Space Bunny, like, just doesn't read her. She's such a beautiful writer, and she creeps me out. Fair enough, you know. If someone's going to creep you out, that's legit. But um, there's this great scene, and I guess this would have to be described as very good characterization in a way. It's psychological characterization. Um, there's this there's two lovers. They do turn out to both be men, but it's irrelevant. Um, and like I said, you're not hard to even know. Um, but one of them is this talented writer, um, who's, you know, brilliant and artistic and creative and passionate and you know, very moody. And the other one is cruel and capricious and um, is probably the more beautiful one. And the artistic one is having a moment of angst and says, you know, promise me, if I die, promise me that you'll publish every scrap of writing that you can find. And the lover says, when you die, when I kill you, I'm going to burn every scrap of writing that I can find, and you will disappear forever, or something to that effect. And just the depth of passion and emotion on the part of both the characters is just more intense than anything you normally read. You know, I would love to be able to write with that kind of psychological intensity, but I'm probably too dispassionate an individual, to be able to even conceive of that sort of thing. Thalio says, I'm really enjoying A Sea of Skulls. That prologue, oof. Yeah, I mean, uh, there are ways, obviously, to grab the reader and shake them around. Um, but it's not. It's much more. What I did in The Sea of Skulls is a hundred, 1,000 times easier than what Tanith Lee manages to accomplish in about 2 paragraphs. You know, I mean, she's one. I mean, her stuff is it can be hit or miss. It's not always great. But I've read everything, and some of their stuff has been published post mortem. I haven't read all of that yet, um, although I really do need to. But the reason that I read her stuff, even her kitty stuff, is for moments like that. You just don't get moments of that kind of intensity very often in literature. I mean, that's why, let's face it, a lot of Guy de Maupassant stuff in 2024 that, was very shocking and outre and all this sort of thing back, when he was writing in the 19th century. Um, it's pretty thin gruel these days. When there's all kinds of horrific stuff on 4chan and in R-rated movies and frankly the frickin' news. Um, and yet, and yet, he can still write things like that story about the boy and the horse that just chills you to the core of your soul, you know, because it's real, because it really delves into the human condition. And um, and so I think that that's one of the reasons why we read is for those moments. That's why I often read. You can see that some of the stuff that I read, especially like with the Japanese novels, um, I read a lot more female Japanese writers than I do um, European or American writers. Uh, Maybe because of the slightly alien element makes it more interesting to me. Um, but the it's still the ability. I don't care. Like for example, um, the Divine Secrets of the Ya Sisterhood is a total chick book. I think I've read it like 5 or 6 times. It's such a good book. It is so good at portraying elements of the human condition that feel real, that absorb you. Manuel wants to know, do you already know how Arts of Dark and Light is going to end? Yes, I do. Um, in case you hadn't heard, the next and final book is going to be called A Grave of Gods. And hopefully it's going to be better than both A Sea of Skulls and A Throne of Bones. I'm curious, for those of you who don't talk about any details or things that you specifically liked. I'm just curious, of the two books, if you've read both of the two complete books, and maybe nobody here has, But which one do you prefer? Which one do you like better? Or even which one do you think is better? A Sea of Skulls or a Throne of Bones? I'm just curious to know whether the trajectory is improving or arcing downward. Kajia approves of A Grave of Gods as a title. Good. I'm glad that. I mean, I went through a lot, and I mean a lot, of possible titles. Some of them were even pretty cool, but Manuel didn't quite understand the question. I'm only about 30% through A Sea of Skulls, but I like it better so far. No, that's why I specifically said if you've read the entirety of both of them, you know, which do you think is better? Because you can't judge it fairly, you know. Silent Draco says A Sea of Skulls. Blue Stem commented that your writing has improved. That's encouraging. I kind of felt, to be honest, I kind of felt the other way. I felt like, but you know, the thing is, you can't trust your feelings with this kind of stuff. I mean, let's face it. We've all heard authors say, "I feel great about what I've written," and then you read it and you're like, "Yeah, you really shouldn't." um, and that's one thing that I encourage both musicians and writers to do is don't talk about what you've done. Don't talk about it. You know, Hawk says A Throne of Bones on the whole, but the early middle of A Sea of Skulls was the best section of anything so far. Okay. Nibmeister, I like both about the same. Fair enough. I mean, to be honest, I'm completely happy with them being about the same because I I don't really like series that are disjointed. I'd almost, in most cases, I'd almost rather like read a series that is like a seven, and maybe it closes with an eight, than something that is like, you know, eight, three, eight, you know, or something like that. It's just it's so disjointing, and it just doesn't like fit within your memory very nicely. Um, that may sound a little strange, but it makes sense to me. Um, but you know, the I'm just hoping, you know, I understand that writers age out. That's why I'm going to get A Grave of Gods done within the next, hopefully the next 2 years, next 3 years maximum. Um, I want the series to be complete. I want it to be finished. I don't like it when authors leave series unfinished. Um, and honestly, unless you're going to try to, you know, beat Steven Erikson, um, and write however many ridiculous millions of words that he wrote, what's the point in trying to compete with that? You know, um, mainstream comic creators are really bad about talking about what they've done. Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is that, I mean, part of the problem, and I think uh, John can probably attest to it, is sometimes when you do things and you put in some little thing, um, you want to know that people noticed it, but then nobody says anything about it, so you want to say something about it, but it's just a bad idea. It's not a good idea because it's what you're really doing there is you're trying to say, look, look what a smart boy I am. Look what a special thing I did. You know, and I think that it really gets you on the wrong path. Um, I think you start focusing on the wrong things. You know, for me, getting A Throne of Bones done really depended on not trying to do something special or creative or particularly admirable. You know, um, it's something that I decided no subtexts, no literary fireworks, just straight up characters and story. Characters and story, nothing else. I'm not a literary writer. My writing is, serviceable, but no one's going to read me the way they read Tanith Lee. You know, no one's going to read me the way they read Edgar Allan Poe. And that's fine. It's 100% fine. You got to know who you are in order to keep your objectives reasonable. Now, a lot of people said when I first started that I'm going to do something, and I think I believe I can do something similar to what George Martin did, but better. I mean, I publicly said that. And I didn't blame anybody. I didn't take any offense. I didn't blame anybody when people said, yeah, you're crazy. Um, I don't think anyone considers that crazy now. Um, and I don't think that most people who will have read both series are even going to consider a Game of Thrones much of a match for Arts of Dark, a Song of Ice and Fire. I don't think that they're going to find that it compares very well to Arts of Dark and Light. We'll see. Carnaby, could you ever kill off a beloved main character before the end of a book? I already did. So, not a problem at all. Chalabear says Martin's success was all about mixing great story with a lot of wieners. Well, he does have some great elements to it. He's a good writer. You know, um, I think, I think he is a really good writer. I think just basically in terms of just the enjoyability of a Martin paragraph, he's a better writer than I am. I have no problem at all seeing that. You know, um, but when you put the whole thing together, in terms of its coherence, how much you were into it, how much you like the characters, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there I think, uh, because of course I have an unfair advantage in that he's never going to finish, and his stuff has been going, reliably downhill as the story has gone on, um, and so we'll see. But I haven't finished mine yet, so we can theorize all we want, but until you get across that finish line, I mean, you know, not everybody's Tolkien, where as great as the as the end is, some of the best stuff is actually in the middle book. And of course, he wrote it all as one book. Let's keep that in mind. Manuel says the first three in A Song of Ice and Fire are great. The rest were horrible. See, I wouldn't go that far. I think that the first two were good. I really liked the very beginning, just the very beginning, the initial introduction to the Ironborn. So like about the first like two chapters, and then that it all started going downhill. And you keep reading on, going, maybe it'll turn around, maybe it'll turn around. I don't think it's going to turn around. Who the fuck are these new characters, and what the hell does this have to do with anything? And if you read far enough into A Song of Ice and Fire, you know the point when you were thinking that. I mean, you know the point you were thinking that. Hawk says the most important thing is to not let HBO write the ending. See, but the thing is, That's Martin hiding behind it. He wrote that ending. That's the ending that he wrote. He tries to pretend, well, they just, that's how they filmed it and blah. There is no freaking way that he didn't have that all mapped out. There is no way that he didn't tell them, well, this is how it ends, and then, they just, because he's got a whole, I mean, he's probably got enough actually written out on paper, or his assistants or whoever. The problem is, it's not good, and it doesn't answer it doesn't tell what happened because, of course, and we can see this structurally. He created too many perspective characters. In fact, I think I can find it. Let me see if I can find this here. It might amuse you. Probably show you a little bit more, a little too clearly how I think. But I knew that he had a problem with the perspective characters. And also I wanted to have a similar structure. That's why it's, very similar number of words, very similar number of perspective characters. Not necessarily divvied up the same way that his are divvied up initially, but you can see exactly where his problem is. And let me see here. I need to get that types. Try to find my spreadsheet. Maybe. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So anyhow, this is just in the initial one. I had a thing where I figured out exactly how many characters he was using. Anyhow, I can't find it. But he went from something like 9 to from 9 perspective characters in the first book to like 15 in the next one. And so I was pretty sure that he was going to have to kill some of them off or drop them in order to make the third volume viable. And instead, he goes off on another tangent, and I think there was something like around 22. Right? How do you keep track of that? You can't. And so, and you can't wrap up the story either. So I think that the reason that he's not finished is a combination of 3 factors. Number one, he allowed the books to get out of control. The story is completely out of control. Too many perspective characters. There's no way to pull them all back together. Number 2, he aged out. Writers are like athletes. They can write, but they do lose their ability to write effectively. Colleen McCullough is obviously my favorite example. It usually happens somewhere around the age of 65. There are obviously a few very unique exceptions to that, but in general, that's the case. Which, of course, being 55 myself, that's one of the reasons why I'm like, okay, in the event that I am not able to continue writing at a satisfactory level, I need to make sure that I get the most important books that I really want to write and that I think I can actually write done. So that's why I'm getting the SSH book done now. That's why Grave of Gods will get done. There's a couple other projects I'd like to tackle, but I will probably, unfortunately, never attempt to tackle the Summa Economica that I would have liked to have written. I don't see any way that, unless I end up being, I don't even think, even if I had the time, if I knew I had the time, I don't think that the concepts and stuff are clear enough to me. And so I'm not interested. You know, if I can't do it right, then I'd rather do something else. Um, so c'est la vie. Generic Entity says, I'm pretty sure the HPO team was chosen because they correctly guessed the ending he had planned. Well, I'm sure that's part of it. I'm sure there's other elements that went into it, but Secret King Bran Stark, of course. Who else? Who else would? I mean, the only other possible uh, solution that would be acceptable to George Martin would, of course, be Tyrion the dwarf. But that's his self-insert, so even he wasn't willing to go that low. And so um, that leaves, you know, the crippled Secret King. You know, it can't be an alpha. You know, that's too fundamentally offensive. It can't be anyone heroic. That's too fundamentally antagonizing to the bitter Gamma's soul. You know, remember the Gamma always has to win. A Gamma writer has to win. You know, and who else could possibly win than the creepy little guy going around spying on people having sex with each other? I mean, if we just described all the characters from the beginning, wouldn't that be enough? You know, what you know about George Martin, wouldn't that be enough to go, yeah, that's the winner? So, anyhow, on that incredibly edifying note, um, I will I will leave you. Um, anyhow, thanks for tuning in. Have a excellent rest of the weekend. Enjoy the championship games tomorrow on Vox Day, and this is the Darkstream.